Now I am inviting to the stage Dominik Vuletic and Antonio Vlahov. Who of you will join us with the presentation? Welcome, Dominik, floor is yours.
Thank you, Václav. Nice to see you after several years. Let me first start at the beginning. Let me say that I'm like to express my gratitude to the Professor Horak and her team, Assistant Professor Safranco and Dr. Poljanec for organizing this conference, and that I'm very glad to have this opportunity to participate in this conference. So I will now start the presentation. Do you all see the presentation? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay, so just to...
Yes, it is. It is fine now.
Okay. So the subject matter of the presentation is the general meetings of shareholders in COVID-19 lessons learned in comparative context and Croatian law. It's the same subject as the written submission to the conference that were made by Assistant Professor Antonio Vlahov from the Department of Tourism and myself. The main emphasis of the paper and the presentation will be and is on virtual or hybrid general shareholder meetings. So let us define such meetings. Virtual only shareholders meetings would be such meetings where all shareholders or their authorized legal representatives participate in a meeting from a distance by digital means, and hybrid ones would be such meetings where some of the shareholders or their legal representatives participate in person at the meeting, while others participate by digital means or by remote voting from a distance. Of course, provisions allowing for the possibility of virtual-only shareholder meetings have been previously implemented in some jurisdictions, in some legislations, even before the COVID-19 crisis broke out. But this relative legal novelty is regarded to the status of utmost regulatory importance in the crisis conditions. We have here some statistics showing that in US jurisdiction, Russell 300,000 index companies that basically index whole of the US stock market shows that only a small percentage of companies where that was allowed, because the US is of course a federal jurisdiction, were held as a virtual only or hybrid general meetings even before the crisis. Our analysis gives comparative overview of several jurisdictions. First is the most liberal one, the US state of Delaware, then two European Union member countries, Italy and Germany, and the European but non-EU member country, Switzerland, and the emphasis of our analysis is on our native Croatia. So Delaware General Corporation law allowed for virtual-only general meetings of shareholders before the crisis and without any preconditions that possibility is stipulated in the company's bylaws. We have an excerpt from the Delaware General Corporation law here. The board of directors may, in its sole discretion, determine that meetings shall not be held at any place, but may instead be held solely by means of remote communication. Similar regulation is liberal regulation regarding the general meeting of shareholders is in US state of Indiana and in several other US states and in Canada and Hong Kong, etc. So this would be considered in this field, in this regard, the most liberal jurisdictions. In Delaware, legal conditions for such participations are that reasonable measures to verify that each person is deemed present and permitted to vote at the meeting by the means of the remote communication is a stockholder or a proxy holder or their representative. That reasonable measures to provide that such stockholders or proxy holders have a reasonable opportunity to participate in the meeting and to vote on matters submitted to the stockholders, including opportunity to read or hear the proceedings of the meeting substantially with such proceedings, and that the record of such vote or other action must be maintained by the corporation. These are general legal conditions in the Delaware General Corporation Law. But even in Delaware, which is one of the most liberal jurisdictions in the world, some legislative adjustment was necessary when the COVID-19 crisis broke out. Delaware governor issued order permitting all public companies that have scheduled in-person general meetings of shareholders to switch to hybrid or virtual only general meetings of shareholders. The legal reasoning behind this governor order was the US Securities and Exchange Commission staff guidance on conducting shareholder meetings in the light of the COVID-19 conditions. And so the companies that have already started initiated procedure but did not hold general meetings of shareholders in person were allowed just to switch to the virtual only general meetings of shareholders. Italy, the country in European country that was most in first wave of the COVID-19 was most seriously impacted, implemented strict restrictions on personal movement by the decree of the Prime Minister of the Republic on the starting from the 8th March of 2020. Italian company law before the crisis allowed for virtual general meetings of shareholders only for companies that had included such possibility in their bylaws, and only a minority of Italian companies had such provision in their bylaws. So effectively, this situation put a stop to all general meetings of shareholders in the country during the peak of their annual season after the end of the fiscal year. So emergency legislative response was necessary in Italy, and it came in the form of the legislative decree, popularly known, it has a long name, formal, as the Cura Italia, that was adopted on the 17th March of 2020. And the Cura Italia decree introduced, regarding this area of the general meetings of shareholders, possibility that the general meetings of shareholders to be held by remote telecommunication technology, regardless of specific provisions for such purpose in the company bylaws. And the Cura Italia also abolished the previous requirement of the Italian company law that chairperson and secretary to be in the same location when the meeting is being held, general meeting of shareholders is being held. Italian experience with the implementation of Cura Italia showed that a majority of public listed companies used multilateral trading systems such as EMI Italia used electronic means to for their general meetings of shareholders. Germany, similar to Italy, in its company law in Aktiengesetz, before the COVID-19 crisis, did not allow for virtual only general meetings of shareholders unless this possibility was expressly stipulated in the company's bylaws. But German legislative response was encompassed in the COVID-19 Mitigation Act, CMA, that allowed for a limited period within 2020 to virtual general meetings being conducted, even if that possibility is not prescribed by the company bylaws. The decision of such virtual general shareholder meetings should be authorized by the supervisory board of the company, and the general legal condition in the Germany CMA for such virtual only general meetings of shareholders are to have a live transmission of the meeting, online voting, possibility to partake in questions and answers, and opportunity to express dissent. Switzerland had most conservative approach from all the selected jurisdictions that we analyzed. It did not allow in its pre-crisis legislation for virtual only meetings of shareholders, and shareholders had an exclusive right to attend the meeting in person. Confederate measures combating COVID-19 imposed a ban on all public and private manifestations, and that of course affected the general meetings of shareholders. That ban was implemented in Switzerland on 17th of March of 2020. And their legislative response was first in the form of the second COVID-19 Confederate Ordinance that temporarily allowed for virtual and hybrid general meetings of shareholders. that ordinance allowed shareholders to exercise their rights exclusively in writing, electronically, or by the means of the independent representative. Very positive experience with the implementation of COVID-19 ordinance in Switzerland showed that the majority of companies used electronic votes, while majority of public companies used voting by proxy. Experience was so positive in Switzerland that Switzerland decided to permanently switch to the possibility of virtual-only general meetings of shareholders and adopted a revision of its company law in the autumn of 2020, allowing such possibility permanently. Croatia, our native Croatia, allowed for possibility of virtual-only and hybrid general meetings of shareholders in the latest revision of the Companies Act that were adopted by the Croatian Parliament on the 15th of April of 2020. That was, of course, in accordance to the harmonization with the EU Shareholders Directive. Also, there are some conditions for that. Of course, if this possibility is stipulated as in majority of other European countries in the company bylaws, and specifically in Croatia in the Articles of Association. So the Articles of Association may provide for or authorize the board to enable shareholders to exercise all or some of their rights by electronic communication in whole or in part, and when they do not participate in person or through a proxy at the venue. The general legal conditions stipulated in the Article 274 of the Croatian Companies Act for such general shareholders meetings is that the mutual communication enables shareholders to address the general meeting in real time from distance, that shareholders are allowed to vote during or before the general meeting without the need for their participation, and the identification of shareholders, the security of electronic communication, and inalienability of expression of will is ensured. However, vast majority of Croatian companies did not include in their Articles of Association possibility of holding virtual only or hybrid general meetings of shareholders. And when COVID-19 crisis broke out, strict measures on personal gathering and movement of persons were implemented during March 2020. And the first reaction of majority of companies was at that time to schedule their regular annual general meetings of shareholders around May 2020 or at the latest possible dates, hoping that restrictions will be lifted.
Attention, time limit.
I'm very close. Group of Croatian distinguished legal scholars from the area of company law proposed a bill enabling for virtual only meetings to be held without this possibility expressly stipulated in company bylaws, but it was supported, this bill, by the Croatian Bar Association, but it was not supported by the government. The government decided not to take any specific legislative measures in that regard, and the restrictions were lifted very early because of the preparation for parliamentary election and tourist season. First, hybrid virtual general meeting was held in Croatia, to our knowledge, on the 27th of May 2020 by the tourist company Montpellier, seated in the eastern town of Bale. And it was successful. It was done by the two software platforms, Zoom and Codex Sortio. So, conclusions. We have seen, our comparative analysis have shown that most liberal jurisdictions in this field have shown that they are better prepared to facilitate COVID-19 crisis conditions than the conservative jurisdictions. However, even in most liberal ones, like Delaware, some additional legislative adjustment was necessary when crisis broke out. We have seen in a majority of European countries, that includes that we looked and we know others. We have seen from the plenary session, Professor Van der Elst lecture on situation in France. We have seen that they introduced this possibility of virtual only shareholder meetings temporarily or permanently, even if not stipulated in the company bylaws, by legislative response. And we have seen the largest switch in Switzerland that did not allow any possibility for virtual only general shareholder meetings to permanently allowing such possibility. Croatia, sadly, did not have any legislative response in that area. And lastly, this comparative analysis enabled us to produce some general policy recommendations for this field. First, regulatory framework should, national or federal, should aim to enable virtual and hybrid general meetings of shareholders ex lege, independent to company's bylaw. And national regulatory framework should aim to give companies in crisis conditions, such as COVID-19 pandemic, opportunity to switch from in-person general meetings of shareholders to virtual or hybrid ones even after the procedure for the general meetings of shareholders was initiated. And that would end my presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I invite the audience to ask questions using the chat option, and I am immediately